Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show. It is Thursday, May the 15th. I don't think there's a Canadian alive who isn't complaining about the cost of groceries. Certainly, I hear about it every night over dinner. More scientifically, Statistics Canada concedes that inflation is hitting groceries harder than other things. Last month, food was up 3% year over year. Meanwhile, in their newsletter, Loblaws is calling for more and worse as tariffs start to bite. With me tonight is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, who thinks about these things all the time. Dr. Charlebois is the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Nova Scotia's Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. As we were saying just in the pre-show chat, my wife is a big fan and is eagerly hanging on, looking for hope, I think, as she goes to the grocery. We want to talk today about whether we can believe the evidence of our own till slips. It feels like food is up 10% year over year, and yet the official numbers say it's only 3%. So what do you see out there?
Well, typically that's what happens when you have a food inflation rate be higher than the general inflation rate. People will notice higher food prices. Produce is higher compared to January. Dry goods in the center store, pantry goods are much more expensive now. And the freezer aisle is also quite problematic these days. So those are sections where we've seen higher prices, but we are expecting higher prices throughout the year. But we're not talking 10 or 20%. I know a lot of people are confused. If they hear 25% tariffs, they think, food prices are going to go up by 25%. That's not exactly how it works. In December, we did release Canada's food price report. We are expecting food prices to increase by about 5% by the end of this year. Now, 5% is not 25%, but it's not nothing. It represents about $800 more for a family of four for the entire year. So, and a lot of people out there just don't have that kind of money. So it is going to be challenging compared to 2024.
I get the feeling that when you tell me that, it certainly coincides with what I observe as we go through the till and we pay, and it's a lot of money for somewhat less. And yet Statistics Canada tells you it's 3%, and that's actually good because before it was 4% and 5% in 2022 and 23. So why is it so hard to rely on official numbers? Why are they so different from what we experience in the grocery store?
So you're opening up a can of worms here. As an academic, I can certainly attest that there is a data deficit in Canada. The picture that we get every month from Statistics Canada is always lagging a little bit. When you actually do some spot checks and when you actually look at prices and what actually is going on out there, you can sense that there is a disconnect between what is actually going on versus what is being measured by Statistics Canada. But the reality in Canada is that we only have Statistics Canada. There's not much we can do about that. Unlike the US, where I actually work sometimes, I actually have colleagues at Texas A&M, for example. American academics have access to way more data, so you have a better sense of what's happening. So that's why there is a lot of frustration out there. Consumers are frustrated because they're not sure exactly what's going on. Media is also quite frustrated because we don't have much data to work with to really convey to the public an actual factual image of what actually is going on with food inflation.
The other thing that we notice fairly frequently is that things we're accustomed to be able to find easily are either find with difficulty or not available at all. Something just disappears from the shelves for 3 weeks at a time, and then finally it comes back, usually.
Yeah.
And if you ask in the store, they say, oh, well, the supply chain is broken. Well, I guess it must be, but what is there something particular that is happening in the supply chain other than the normal seasonal shortages of greengroceries?
Yeah, the disappearance of certain brands or the renewal of certain relationships up the food chain is actually quite normal. Every year we expect about 20% of products that you would find in a grocery store today not to be there next year. So there's always a turnover of inventory, and of course, many products do fail at commercialization. So we are expecting a bit of a turnover. So the empty shelves that you see, either there's a stock shortage, there are supply issues, but it's mostly because there's some realignment with shelves. For example, a grocer will just let go of a supplier and is renegotiating with its new supplier. In the last few months, it's been incredibly volatile. Why? Because of the pivoting. A lot of grocers had to source food beyond the United States. Canadians just weren't buying American products in the middle of winter. And so a lot of grocers had to pivot and find grapes in South Africa, find produce in Egypt and other places to make sure that Canadians actually had something to buy during their visit to the grocery store at an affordable price.
I see. All right. Well, that does answer somewhat the question. Loblaws, before we leave the United States tariff situation, in their newsletter, which I just happen to have here, the food inflation report comes out of Loblaws is, I mean, for the benefit of viewers who may not follow the numbers as closely as you do, I think there's something like 2,400 stores across Canada that are owned by Loblaws under different brand names, from No Frills to I don't know what they all are.
Shoppers is a big piece of Loblaw. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Loblaws, as a public service, puts this very, very good newsletter out, and their headline for the last one was that tariffs are going to cost Canadians more for food. So I would hope that Loblaws knows what it's talking about and is not giving us incorrect information just to scare us. But how does the tariffs affect food that you don't import because you were not buying American?
Loblaw's communication strategy is really interesting because we do have quite a few grocers in Canada, but Loblaw is the only one trying to get ahead of what's happening with inflation, warning consumers about what's happening up the food chain. And I think it's a smart way to do it. So they have this T right next to prices right now. If you go into a Loblaw operated store, you'll know whether or not a product was impacted by tariffs if you see a T right next to the price.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And just yesterday, Pierre Bank, the CEO of Loblaw, who's been on my podcast, the Food Professor podcast, he actually acknowledged that the number of products with a T was at 1,000 right now, but that number could increase to up to 6,000 over the next few weeks because of counter tariffs implemented by Ottawa. The concern that Loblaw would have is that a lot of Canadians just don't understand how tariffs actually work. They think that if Trump's applies tariffs on Canadian imports, it impacts Canadians. Not necessarily. It's the response from Ottawa that will impact the lives of Canadians. And so I think that's really the message that Loblaw is trying to convey here. And those counter tariffs will impact an increasing number of products because, they're running out of inventory. So the inventory that was not subject to tariffs before, say, March the 4th, now are subject to tariffs, and prices are likely to increase for many categories. So that's kind of the warning that we got from Loblaws in that newsletter and yesterday on LinkedIn.
But you're not saying that I think you talked about getting grapes from South Africa a few minutes ago. You're not saying that if we bring in grapes from South Africa, that the Canadian government is tariffing those. It's just American products. Is that correct?
That is correct. Exactly.
Then why would the South African grapes have a T beside them?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. It's just products coming from the U.S. or let's say that there's an ingredient bought by manufacturing Canada that comes from the US that was tariff, that product would likely have a T as well. But if you actually are importing grapes from Peru or South Africa, that wouldn't have a T. But the problem, I'm sure you can understand that getting grapes from South Africa instead of California will cost you more as a distributor to get those grapes into Canadian stores. So eventually something will need to be adjusted price wise.
So actually, when we apply a tariff to American imports of food, we're hurting ourselves.
Pretty much. What I didn't expect, to be honest, is that a lot of Canadians don't seem to understand that concept at all. And so we had the elbows up campaign, and people were expecting Ottawa to retaliate, which is fine. But the challenge here is that we are at a disadvantage for a few years. One, we're up against 25% of the world economy, which is the United States. That's a massive piece right there. And two, their economy is much stronger than ours right now. If you look at the unemployment rate, it's pretty idle. The Federal Reserve is not cutting rates, whereas in Canada, the Bank of Canada is cutting rates. That's a sign. That's a sign that confidence is not necessarily there for Canada. The Canadian dollar is basically the same, has the same value versus the American greenback for months now, despite the fact that American policies have actually hurt the American dollar. And so that's another sign. And lastly, and this is the most important one, food inflation is actually dropping in the US. So America can afford to implement tariffs on goods coming into the US because their economy is much more competitive, much more productive. Consumers are not as much in debt as well. And so you have all that happening in the US, while in Canada, people are losing their jobs. The GDP per capita is not increasing. There's no wealth creation as much as in the US. So right now, I think what Loblaws is trying to say, along with Walmart in the US, is that the tariff game is a dangerous one, especially for Canada, because we're just not in a good position economically to go against the Americans, especially right now.
Could you, if you live close to the border, is it worth doing your groceries across the border? Can you give us a few examples of, butter, eggs, bread, that sort of thing?
It depends where you live. I mean, I would say that right now, not necessarily, with the exception of perhaps some dairy products and some meat products, particularly poultry. You may find some good deals. But I've actually been in the US 3 times the last 6 months, and I do go to grocery stores all the time. So I went to Oklahoma, Texas, and New York. And each time I didn't see much of a difference because of the conversion rate. I mean, our dollar's at around 71 US cents versus $1. So obviously you have to pay more than a 30% premium to get the same amount of food, and that's certainly not helping cross-border shopping. So my only comment about this is that you will not necessarily save, but you will have more choices. You will have more choices. There are more choices offered to Canadians for sure.
Okay. I do recall that prior to the last U.S. election on November the 5th, that food prices, egg prices were one of the Trump talking points. He managed to convince Americans that was the fault of the administration, the Biden administration. And I'm hearing now that they actually are coming down a bit. And I think you confirmed that. It's just that they hadn't come down enough to really make it worth driving a long way to reap the savings.
That's correct. And so I think President Trump is partially correct in blaming the former administration, because the avian flu was not very well managed in the U.S. at all. They lost control way before Mr. Trump was elected. And of course, the implications came after with the loss of flocks and birds, and we're talking over 200 million birds that had to be culled. So obviously, egg prices became a problem early in 2025, but things are actually getting back to normal slowly in most states. So the beauty of the poultry industry is that it can recover very quickly. The production cycle is 8 to 9 weeks. So if you are to experience, say, a swine flu impacting the hog industry, the recovery time is longer because of the production cycle. That is longer. It's 3 to 4 months, for example, instead of 8 weeks.
Right. I have to ask you this: how much has the carbon tax been responsible? I'm not just talking about the 20 cents a liter or whatever it was on gasoline and diesel. I'm talking about the fact that the carbon tax is incurred at every level of production. How much is the carbon tax responsible for our high food prices in Canada?
Well, this is the one question that I've received countless times in the last couple of years, for sure. Why? Because the Canadian government has never bothered to assess how the carbon pricing policy implemented through the carbon tax would impact food affordability in Canada. The true answer to your question is that we can't really tell, because food prices at retail are impacted by several factors, including the weather, our own behavior, what we buy, what we don't buy, will impact prices, eventually promotions, loss leaders. So it's very difficult to correlate the policy with retail prices. However, our lab, we've done some work in this area, only to realize that there is a strong correlation between wholesale prices, so prices up the food chain, versus the carbon pricing policy. And you can see that really the carbon tax has compromised the entire sector's competitiveness, which could eventually impact prices and how prices are set at retail. That's as far as anybody can go. If you hear an economist saying that there is no relation, there is no impact, or there's a huge impact, both of them are wrong, because you can't really state for sure exactly how the carbon tax is impacting food prices over time.
Okay, well, fair enough then. The don't want to leave people without hope, Doctor.
That's a good strategy.
It just seems we have them. We have the big grocers saying it's going to get worse, and certainly the evidence every time you go to the store is that seems to be getting just that little bit more, and sometimes that rather much more expensive to buy the thing that you went in there for.
Yeah.
So, two questions. First is, would you care to venture a long-term prognosis on how this is going to play out? Well, does this just keep going, or is there some reason to think that you're going to hit a plateau at some point? And then the second thing is, what can the consumer do about it? Should they stockpile things that keep, for example, in the belief that you're going to be in a year's time eating something that you paid last year's prices for? What can you do?
Absolutely. Well, there's a stockpiling. I would stockpile one thing, and that's coffee. Coffee has gone way up, and I don't see how prices will go down. The other product is beef. Beef is very expensive, and we're not expecting prices to drop either. So if you see any of these two products on sale, buy as much as you can, for sure. But I am hopeful that things will stabilize. The challenge that we have right now, coming out of the Trudeau regime, is that we have seen many policy-induced inflationary phenomena, essentially. Like the GST holiday is, to me, was a bad idea, because you're basically playing around with market conditions, allowing opportunistic pricing to occur. As soon as you actually eliminate a tax temporarily, retailers, restaurant operators will actually cover the spread. And that's kind of what we think has happened in the last several months after the GST holiday. And of course, we've talked about the carbon tax compromising our food security. There's been other issues, the bureaucracy, interprovincial trade barriers, but we're having discussions right now to eliminate all that, or to at least look at some of the nonsense from a policy perspective. And that's a good sign. That's a good sign. So I'm hopeful that the new government, led by Mark Carney, will look at food security through an economic lens to make sure that there's no one left behind. Because last 10 years have been really, really tough for many Canadians, especially the younger generations. The cost of living issue is real. It's real for many, many Canadians.
Well, yes. I mean, you would probably, is it your lab that follows the food bank numbers?
That's correct. Absolutely. I'm actually keynoting the Food Bank of Canada convention in June in Montreal. So I work very closely with
You mean there's a convention for food banks? We have
Absolutely.
that many?
And actually, in fact, the convention is to raise money and awareness for food banks. So it's a good cause.
Well, I'm sure it's a good cause, but I mean, how appalling in a country like Canada that not only are there food banks and people using them, but there are so many of them that they actually need to get together once a year to talk shop. I mean, this is what you expect out of the energy industry or, the teachers' unions or something. And the food banks are getting together to have a convention?
I'm of the mind. I'm not sure what your opinion is on this particular issue, but I'm of the mind that food banks are here to stay. I mean, I know that some parliamentarians believe that they should disappear. The advantage that food banks have, and we saw that during COVID, they can actually turn on a dime and operationalize help, targeted help to help Canadians. Governments can't do that. They can't within days pivot and offer support and help to people who just lost their jobs. Market failures will continue to happen. And I'm a capitalist at heart, but market failures will continue to occur. And I think the best unit that can actually help, which can actually help Canadians and are well equipped to do that, are food banks.
Well, I don't have a principled objection to food banks. I just think it's a shocking thing that in a wealthy country like Canada, it should be necessary to have them. Anyway,
it's shocking to see so many people needing them for sure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Look, we are out of time. One last question, and that is Canada unique in having this problem, or is the whole world finding food more expensive?
Right now, if you look at the G7, for example, we're average. The thing about Canada, though, is that we shouldn't be average. We should actually have a lower food inflation rate because we are north of the only superpower on earth. And North America is a bit of a food security bubble. So having a food inflation rate of 3.2%, which is well above 1% compared to the US, is really unexcusable. We should actually have a lower food inflation rate than what we have now.
Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Really appreciate it. And I know there are an awful lot of people take what you say very seriously. And again, it's an honor to have you. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.